Hello, welcome back to George Past the Post. I wanted to do a more in-depth analysis of the Hungarian election, a bit more about the background rather than just purely focusing on the results. Because inevitably after elections, people obsessed with elections like me, people tend to make wise after the event analysis. One of these is that, Orban had been in power for 16 years, so, he was going to lose anyway. Voters don't like somebody being in power for too long. But the first point really is to say that there was nothing inevitable about this outcome. Just over 2 years ago, Peter Magyar, again, I apologize in the pronunciation, he was still part of Fidesz, which was Viktor Orban's party, and there was then a scandal which caused him to resign in protest. Even once he'd resigned, he initially wasn't going to set up a political party. So if he hadn't set up a political party, we'd be talking about a different outcome. And then even when he did form a political party, it was alongside all the other opposition parties that already existed. And in the European election in 2024, his party competed with all the other opposition parties. Now, the result of 2024 European elections, I think Tisza, they came second with about 30% of the vote. So that showed they were the most popular opposition party. But again, even after that, there's no guarantee that the opposition parties would have necessarily united in the way that they did, or sort of said that they wanted Tisza to win. Because going back over 2.5 years ago, the Hungarian opposition were very fragmented, and I think unsure of where to go, because in I think it was 2014 there had been a group of parties that had formed. I think it was called Unity, which was a group of centre-left parties that had tried to win then, and they were defeated. Then in 2022, there was an opposition alliance called United for Hungary, which was a wide-ranging group of parties from Jobbik on the right to parties on the left, and everyone sort of in between. And they didn't win either. They lost. And so before Magyar sort of emerged, it was sort of hard to see what direction the opposition would go forward. And so in a scenario where Tisza isn't formed, or where Tisza is still formed but it has to compete with all the other opposition parties, given the Hungarian voting system where more than half the seats are first past the post seats, given that, we may well be talking about a scenario where even if Fidesz saw a significant drop in their vote, they could still have been the largest party. They may have managed to secure a majority, probably not a 2/3 majority, but so I'd say there was nothing inevitable. And of course, Fidesz, they got 38% of the vote. Their vote dropped by 38% of the vote. If the other 62% were fragmented, again, we'd be looking at a very different result. We wouldn't be talking about Tisza winning a 2/3 majority. We'd be talking about how Fidesz were maybe the largest party, and possible attempts by the 4 or 5 or 6 opposition parties to try and come up with a post-election coalition, which wouldn't have necessarily had a very stable majority, and with all the prospects of maybe all falling apart quite quickly. So that was my point. There was nothing inevitable about this result. A set of circumstances came together. It's also notable that Magyar and Tisza, it's a conservative party. So when we see people saying that somehow this was a great victory for the Democratic Party in America, or a huge victory for quote unquote the left in general, I would just hit the brakes on those things. Now there is no doubt that yes, Tisza, to win, as I said in the previous video, they needed both the votes of people who'd voted for the opposition parties, so including those on the left and those who were who would self-identify as liberals and moderate conservatives, but they needed people who had previously voted for Fidesz to vote for them as well. So Tisza managed to bring together a very broad coalition, all united by the fact that they wanted to get rid of Orban. Which leads me to another point, which is that we see these takes that say this may be the beginning of the end for populism in the West, or right-wing populism. And I would caution against these takes. Now, the result, obviously, yes, it is a defeat for right-wing populists. But I think what we've seen in the last decade, since populists have really spread onto the scene, where they're either agitating in opposition or they've been in power. The common theme is that voters, most elections these days, they want change. They will vote for whatever the change option may be, if presented in the right way. To caveat this to do with what I've just said about divided opposition in Hungary and the different scenarios you might have seen. And in some scenarios, the opposition will be, quote unquote, there will be establishment parties or liberal parties that are against the populists. And whenever they win, the narrative is, oh, well, this is a defeat for populism. And then there's a big shock when 4 years later, the populists return. So you might remember there was an election in America in 2020 where Donald Trump was defeated. And there was a similar thought that, oh, voters have rejected Trumpism. There's no way Trump could come back. And you might remember he won again in 2024. So it perhaps is more to do with what point of the cycle the populists are. So if they're in government, they are under threat in the same way that governments that are not populist are. Now, of course, as I say, it is a defeat for populism, but to say that this means that populists can't win in elections in other parts of Europe, I think that's a mistake to make too broad an analysis, because all elections are they're specific to the country they're taking place in. They're specific circumstances that people observing from afar like me don't always get or don't really understand. And to take make too many interpretations is that we must always be cautious. It's still fun though. So, I don't begrudge people for making sweeping statements because, it's always fun to analyse elections in those terms. But we should be cautious as well. So those were a few of my thoughts, and I've kept this quite brief for once. We're under 10 minutes, so I will declare victory at that point. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Have a good evening.